Hello, everybody. This is Off Leash with Eric Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. There's tremendous violence taking place in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And naturally, we've got our in-house expert on all things Africa and global affairs. Eric, let me read to you this excerpt from a news story about what's happening with the M23 rebellion. To put this into context for our off-leash viewers, the Rwanda-backed M23 rebels have recently captured Goma, a key city in North Kivu province, leading to thousands of people, including prisoners, fleeing in desperation. This capture has been described as a critical escalation in the conflict, marking the most significant territorial gain by M23 since 2012. The DRC government has accused Rwanda of supporting the M23, which Rwanda denies, countering that the DRC supports anti-Rwandan militias. This is just top line. All this is going down right now, and there's tremendous humanitarian crisis happening as a result of this. Eric, the Congo is a massive piece of territory on the continent of Africa. It's got a very sordid past and history. Walk us through what's happening right now, and then we'll go back into history as well.
Well, what's happening right now, they say the M23 rebels. The reality is that is a surrogate of the Rwandan military run by Paul Kagame. And it started, the Rwandan genocide, of course, happened in 94. And you had part of the Rwandan society, the Hutus, started abusing and a genocide against the Tutsis. And the FDLR, which was that Hutu extremist organization, some of them fled to Eastern DRC, and supposedly the M23 rebels were there to fight against them. But the reality of what it's become is a massive theft organization making about $600 million a month in gold, in cobalt, tin, tantalum, all the high-value minerals coming out of Eastern Congo are taken in areas managed by this M23 gang, supported by Rwandan special forces. Rwanda posts all sorts of high numbers for exports of minerals. None of those minerals are actually produced or mined in Rwanda. They're all stolen from DRC. So in this last go, where they've seized Goma, which is a key city in Eastern DRC, right on the north end of Lake Kivu, there was some Romanian security guys, a PMC, that were holding out, and they held out against about 5 days of attacks from M23. And then finally the Rwandans said, to hell with it, and they invaded with a full mechanized brigade, armored personnel carriers, even tanks, and using armed Turkish TB2 drones to take the city of Goma. So this is not some internal guerrilla spat in Eastern DRC. This is an invasion of a sovereign government into the sovereign territory, taking lots of sovereign territory of the DRC solely over minerals, resources, and the value that Rwanda is looting out of Eastern DRC. There's about 130 various armed gangs, but obviously M23 is the one that is state-sponsored. They also get some help from Uganda, because again, the Ugandan, the UPDF, the Uganda military, is also making huge money off the theft and the trafficking of gold, diamonds, coltan, the thing that makes your cell phone or the battery in your electric vehicle. The top line export from DRC is $37 billion a year in everything from copper to lead to nickel to coltan, cobalt, all the minerals that make the high-end batteries, the NPDR minerals, and of course, diamonds as well. Massive. It's estimated there's $25 trillion of value in the ground in the DRC. And the neighbor, in this case, Rwanda, has gnawed off a chunk and is trying to devour it. And it's funny how some people get up in arms about Russia lopping off a chunk of Ukraine, rightfully. It was Ukrainian sovereign territory. In this case, you have DRC sovereign territory that has been gnawed off, and I would say hacked off by Rwanda by force of arms to perpetuate the theft and stealing of these minerals. And for all the apologists for Rwanda in DC, I have to call bullshit on them, because this is Putin-like behavior in terms of trying to adjust the borders of your country by force of arms.
Really, really fascinating stuff, Eric, because, you talk about this is an invasion from a neighboring country, and it's not getting any attention whatsoever, certainly even in global media, very, very limited attention. And as you say, the eastern portion of the country seems to be very mineral rich. But obviously, the DRC is vulnerable to this sort of invasion. Tell us a little bit about sort of the security apparatus run by the DRC government and the election going back to December of 2023 that got us here.
So the December 2023 election was when President Tshisekedi was reelected. It's a huge country. It has a lot of issues. I mean, you driving around the country, a lot of the roads look more like a swamp and very lumpy. And what should take, a few hours to go 200 miles takes 30 days because it's that rugged. So the logistics and the movement of anything in DRC is a challenge. So difficult also for the DRC government to project law and order, combat power, et cetera, to defend all its borders. And because of the massive amount of wealth and the lawlessness and the various gangs, there's 130 different armed gangs that are effectively resource robbing gangs. It's just made for some really bad secondary effects. Something like 80% of the women in Eastern DRC have been raped. Imagine that. Not 8%, 80%.
Wow.
So the criminal lawlessness of if you give completely lawless people the access to more money and more weapons centered around the minerals trade, you get to an even greater level of chaos, and that's what persists in the DRC. So the Congolese military trying to stand up to that is not great. And there's, like with any third world military, there's generals that are there for the take to line their pockets, and there are some that want to fight and do their patriotic duty. And, we have that across the board, even in Western militaries as well. Some generals, some officers are there to fight and get a job done, and there's a lot of bureaucrats. And the DRC has a big mix of the latter right now.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's stunning. An 80% of women having been raped. The United Nations reports over 7 million people have been internally displaced in the DRC. And that's before the M23 takeover of Goma. So probably even more people have been displaced in the meantime. What a tragedy. And yet the international community is not responding in any way that I can see.
Well, and again, the UN and the UN peacekeeping approach for the last 50, 60 years globally has been a complete farce, and it has devolved into a big circle of corruption, right? So you have UN peacekeepers there from very third world countries with ill-trained, ill-equipped troops, not well paid, but they're issued firearms and ammunition, and they end up selling those firearms and ammunition to some of these 130 different gangs in exchange for gold. Well, if you were to check the footlockers of the so-called peacekeepers that were being sent home, you would find in most cases those footlockers are lined with little gold dory bars. It's just a 1 kilogram bar of field refined gold. That is the reality of how pathetic and corrupt the UN peacekeeping is. I hope that's one of the next things Team Doge goes after, is just gutting the financing. The U.S. finances, I think, 28 to 35% of all UN peacekeeping, and it's an absolute sham.
Wow.
It is what they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and the idea of a UN peacekeeping force, nice idea, horribly executed, and there's hundreds of millions of people suffering unnecessarily because of that level of incompetence and corruption. And so the DRC is in a tough situation right now because their resource area, North and South Kivu, are some of the richest terrain in the world, and it's been invaded and locked off by their well-armed neighbor, including, also the Rwandans were using Israeli-provided Spike missiles against sovereign Congolese forces. So it's a big problem, and it'll be interesting to see what the neighbors do about this kind of invasion in the Congo.
Yeah, talk about UN peacekeeping forces. If you see the light blue helmets, run. And
yes.
And the lack of outrage is incredible. This article says the European Union canceled its observation mission due to logistical issues, and the East African community was also not present to observe due to accreditation problems. Sounds like a lot of bureaucratic cowards to me who are scared to death of entering, this war-torn nation. And yet people suffer and people die in the process. You've taught us a lot here, Eric, on Off Leash about this great disparity between wealth beneath the ground in some of these African nations, and yet how corruption prevents the proper leveraging of that to the benefit of their own population. Do you think President Tshisekedi has a chance at trying to bring some order to the country and correct this assault from the Rwandans? What does he do from here? What would your recommendation be?
They need to do a lot better job on the PR side of actually raising the alarm that they've been invaded, that a opposing neighbor has gnawed off a chunk of their sovereign territory and taking serious money away from the Congolese people. Two, they need to actually build some capacity to push back and to police their borders. I was 8 years ago, I chartered an airplane and I flew all over Eastern DRC into all these different UN bases because I just wanted to understand what it is they were supposed to be doing versus what they were actually doing. And so landing in all these bases and driving around, I did it over a 6-day period. I can say I've been to every airfield in northern, central, and mostly southeastern DRC, and driven a 30 to 50 kilometer radius around those towns and villages and flown over the whole area at low level. It is rugged terrain. The UN is beyond inept and corrupt, and the Congolese forces are overmatched. And Rwanda, which has been stealing hundreds of millions of dollars of resources, have reinvested into weapon systems and military, which they've plowed in and taken more of their neighbors' terrain. So it's headed in the wrong direction. I don't know that the U.S. isn't going to do something about it, but it does matter to U.S. supply chains, because whether it's copper, cobalt, coltan, all those key minerals that go into making our electronics, electric vehicles, phones, etc., comes from there. And Dodd-Frank, that passed into law, requires a conflict-free supply chain for those minerals. And Rwanda is making it 100% conflict-based supply chain right now. So it's revisit this in 3 months, and we'll see if anything's changed. But trajectory is not great right now, and Rwanda needs to stop.
Yeah, recently, Eric, here on Off Leash, we had a conversation and did an episode about what's happening across the continent of Africa, and the worst violence since 1946 has broken out in about 19 different nations, if I remember correctly. Is that part of the problem for the DRC? Is that this invasion is taking place within the context of this continent-wide spate of violence and attacks and militia attacks? that's going on? Is that part of the problem with drawing attention to this crisis?
Well, yes, it's easy for conflicts to get lost in the noise because there's so many of them across Africa, whether it's up in the Sahel with all kinds of jihadis, threatening even in northern Nigeria, people can't be out after 4 p.m. because they're at such high risk of banditry or being killed all across the north of Nigeria. And that's a country of 250 million people. So yeah, the amount of bad news in Africa is at all-time high. In this case, yeah, there's a jihadi group called the ADF, kind of the local ISIS affiliate. But the main problem is this is a brazen, unvarnished, unlimited land grab, resource grab, wealth grab by Rwanda and even by Uganda of their somewhat weaker DRC neighbor, and they're doing it because they can.
Yeah. Really, really fascinating, and yet so tragic. And it's hard to see into the future, and hard to imagine it's only going to get worse. Let me ask you this, and we'll exit on this question, Eric. Is as President Trump, of course, has been working at lightning pace in literally just a couple of weeks in office so far. It's obviously that time hasn't come yet for him to define an Africa strategy based on the national interests of the United States. What might be your recommendations for the president as it relates to Africa and it relates to this crisis in the DRC in particular?
So, there's a lot of concern in Washington about Chinese and Russian influence pushing into a lot of parts of Africa, controlling those supply chains that the U.S. needs for our manufacturing base. I would argue that, for the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that we spend and waste every year on the continent of Africa, the taxpayers get very little return for that. And the fact is, those countries that are in trouble want U.S. help. They want U.S. business. They want U.S. investors. And the myriad of Byzantine laws that the U.S. has put in place really prevents the private sector from helping in all the ways that we can, helping these countries stop their jihadis, bring rule of law, secure their borders, collect taxes, all the basic elements that an economy needs for capital formation, for a safe and secure population. And I am very happy to see the cutoff of USAID because there's so many malign NGOs that have been doing the wrong things, reinforcing the wrong things all across Africa. It's at least a positive step in the right direction, and there's a lot more reforms to be done. And I think I'll save the rest of the analysis because that's probably an entire episode of what we should do in Africa.
And an excellent point about USAID. The left's got their hair on fire because Elon Musk is wise enough to have some of the smartest software coders and experts, IT experts in the world, camped out with him in the old executive office building late at night on weekends. And he says, there's 2 days of the week that the opposition isn't even on the playing field because we're here all the time. And one of the greatest focuses is USAID.
I would say the Dems are not even working on Fridays or Mondays either. I did see a video.
Yes.
I saw a video on one of his team members, smart kid from the University of Nebraska, who figured out using AI how to read some scrolls that were burned from Pompeii, like from 64 AD, that were rolled up, burned, but he somehow figured out how to digitally unroll them and read and decode the Latin and Greek writing on these scrolls. Amazing. And I think they called it the Vesuvius Project that he won. But that's the kind of brainiacs that he is directing against the federal bureaucracy, and they are clearly overmatched by that kind of talent.
Yeah, and they're in an absolute meltdown panic because he's targeting, among other things, USAID, which clearly, at least purportedly, has been a front for the CIA for a long time. And, Africa is one of the places where they've wasted a lot of U.S. taxpayers' dollars. Last word to you, Eric.
I wouldn't even, maybe they got that reputation from the Courts program back during the Vietnam War, which was actually an effective stabilization program. But really, USAID has become a massive money laundering organization for the left, supporting thousands of NGOs with no accountability, putting out $43 billion a year to not be very effective overseas, but to continue to give hundreds of millions, if not more, billions of dollars to Democrat politicians to keep the money flowing. It's a very, very insidious flow, and I'm really glad it's been interrupted.
Yep, interrupted with a timeout and a total review for accountability, the kind of thing we've never seen in the American government. Look, amazing as usual, very, very important insights about this humanitarian crisis. You can only get that here on Off Leash with Eric Prince, with Eric's expertise and insights about what's happening in this war-torn country. That's it for this episode of Off